Within an hour of this photo being taken, one of these people would be brutally murdered. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Matthew Checky. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here is the Oceanside Harbor Beach in Oceanside, California. And to those who don't know, this is my hometown. I was born in Escondido, but I was raised in Oceanside for the first 18 years of my life. This case I remember very well, and it is the reason why I avoid using public restrooms at all costs. Pictured here right in the center is 9-year-old Matthew Checky, and he is pictured with his family just as they're about to start a family reunion. Now, there was some paid camping areas near the Oceanside Pier, which is what this is here, and the family had reserved a large area. The only member of the family that was not able to attend was actually Matthew's father because he was going through leukemia. In the early evening hours of November 14th, 1998, Matthew needed to use the restroom. And this is what the public restrooms looked like there at the beach. Matthew's aunt, pictured here, she took him to the restroom and waited outside. As she waited outside, she saw a couple people trickle into either bathroom. One person she specifically remembers is a younger man, maybe late teens, early 20s, who had walked into the men's room, and then just a couple of minutes later or so, that person walks out of the bathroom, but Matthew still had not come out. So the aunt grew very concerned. She first kind of popped her head inside, said his name, didn't get a response, and no one else said anything. She then walks in to the men's room. Lying on the cement floor in a pool of blood was her 9-year-old nephew, Matthew Checky. His throat had been cut from ear to ear. The man who did this was not caught right away. It would actually take several days after he tried to attack a woman in Hollywood. And he did not hold back about admitting to what he did to Matthew. This was 20-year-old Brandon Wilson. He had a history of drug abuse, and he tried to explain that he was just insane. He said God told him to go on a murder spree and that he was instructed to kill Matthew. He said he just walked in, doesn't matter who was in the bathroom. Matthew was using the urinal. He just casually walked up behind him, grabbed his head, slit his throat, and walked out. And then he went up to Hollywood to try to kill someone else, but failed. During his trial, he just got up and said, "Yeah, I did it, and I would do it again." He tried to plead guilty by reason of insanity, but it didn't work, and he went to trial, and he was found guilty. He was happy when they found him guilty. He told them to please give him the death penalty. They did. He was sent to San Quentin, and he appeared to be excited to get lethal injection, but he would end up hanging himself in his cell. What a guy.
This man had a deadly case of road rage. Literally, it ended in murder. James Wonder was just driving his car one day when he noticed that the car behind him was tailgating him. It was super close. So to teach this driver a lesson, James Wonder slammed on his brakes, forcing the driver behind him to have to slam on his brakes too and think fast. But the driver behind him was actually so mad at James for doing this that he decided to speed in front of him, overtake, and do the exact same thing. Slam on his brakes, forcing James to slam on his. He was giving him a taste of his own medicine, but James didn't like that. And so he did it back again, and so the driver did it back again, and they were just doing it to each other for ages. And eventually, James had had enough, and so he pulled into a parking lot. The other driver followed him in, and they started arguing. They were screaming at each other, and then all of a sudden, James pulled out a gun. Within a matter of seconds, he fired this gun at the other driver, jumped in his car, and sped away. And he didn't realise the gravity of what he'd just done until he got home later that night. And now he knows he has to try and get away with murder. So he bleached his hair, hired a rental car, tried to make himself disguised, but it didn't work. And police ultimately found him the next day and arrested him at his kidney dialysis appointment. And James Wonder went to prison for the rest of his life over 10 minutes of road rage.
Story of Steven Steiner, the boy who disappeared at 8 years old and returned 7 years later. One day, while walking home from school, Steven Steiner was taken into a car. The man brought Steven home and told him that his parents had let him stay the night. That was just the beginning of the 7-year brainwashing that this child would undergo. Steven was given a new name, Dennis, and was even enrolled in schools throughout the next years of his life. According to his teenage friends, he had a pretty normal social life. Everyone thought he was just a normal teenager until one day he broke down in tears. He said he wanted to go home and he missed his family. This is the man who took Steven. His name was Kenneth Eugene Parnell. Throughout the years of Steven's kidnapping, he was sexually molested by this man. Sadly, none of his friends knew it. When Parnell would sense that Steven was getting too close to his friends, he would pick up and relocate. Later, Steven would say in his testimony that Parnell actually tried to get Steven to assist in other kidnappings. Being the good kid that he was, he never assisted. Till one day, Steven returned home from school, and Parnell says to him, "Happy Valentine's Day. Meet your younger brother." Parnell had kidnapped a young boy by the name of Timothy James White. Steven knew that he couldn't let what happened to him happen to this young boy. This dude took action. Parnell would be gone regularly for work, so one day while he was gone, he picked up Timothy and fled in the night. Him and Timothy hitchhiked several miles on a desolate road in the night, till he was picked up by a car who took him to the nearest police station. At this point, Timothy James White was all over the news. So when Steven arrived at the police station, he told police that this was indeed the missing boy. During the police investigation, police asked for his name, and he said that all he knew was that his name was Steven. He proceeds to tell them that he was also kidnapped by Parnell several years ago. The story made national news and the media was all over it. Steven and Timothy were safe. Parnell would soon be arrested, and Steven returned to his family. But the story is far from over. So this guy only served 5 years before being granted parole. This was due to the statute of limitations. At this point, Steven moved on and even met a lady with whom he would soon start a family. Just as Steven's family was beginning to think that they could move on, things take an insane twist. It involves the made-for-TV movie, titled after his famous words, "I know my first name is Steven." It also involves this man, seen standing behind Steven during his media interviews. Part 2 to come. Steven Steiner disappeared at 8 years old and returned 7 years later. His kidnapper brainwashed him and raised him by a different name, Dennis. This man is his kidnapper, Kenneth Parnell. After having Steven for 7 years, he kidnapped another young boy, Timothy White. Steven knew that he did not want the same things happening to Timothy that happened to him. So he made his heroic escape. The story made headlines around the US. Steven returned to his family after living an incognito life as Dennis. Sadly, his kidnapper only served 5 years before being let out on parole. The story was so incredible, they made a made-for-TV miniseries titled "I Know My First Name is Steven," the famous words he told police. Even more tragic, Steven would die shortly after the release of the film, leaving his wife and 2 children behind. But just when this family thought that the reoccurring tragedies were done with, tragedy strikes their small town again. 3 women go missing in Yosemite National Park. Their bodies were found shortly after in a burnt-out vehicle in the forest. 2 weeks after this, another young woman goes missing. Evidence pointed toward a man working at the nearby Cedar Lodge. That employee was this man, seen standing behind Steven while the media bombarded him after his return. That man is Steven's brother, Cary Steiner. He shortly after confessed to killing and sexually assaulting the women. He even took cops to the locations and described what he did. Cary had become the bitter older brother in the shadow of his younger brother's celebrity. When questioned for the first time about the murders, Cary said this: "Before I say anything, I want you to contact producers and writers in Hollywood. I want a major movie of the week made from my story. Before I tell you anything, I want a movie made about me." Exactly happened to the boy who disappeared and returned 7 years later. Said before, they made a movie about him titled "I Know My First Name is Steven." What I forgot to say was that he actually played a cameo role as a police officer in the movie. Steven went on with his life and was on multiple television programs after the release of the movie. Tragically, just before the Emmy Awards, where this actor who portrayed Steven would win an Emmy, Steven passed away in a motorcycle accident, leaving his wife and 2 children behind. As if the tragedies weren't enough for this family, years after Steven's death, his envious older brother becomes this crazy serial killer. But if you thought parts 1 and 2 were crazy enough, Steven's story does not end there. As you know, his kidnapper was actually sentenced to less time than the duration of the kidnapping. Surprise, after this fool gets out of jail, he tries to do the same thing. This time he tried to pay his caregiver's sister $500 to get him a 4-year-old boy. Instead, of course, the woman goes to the cops. The cops provide her with a fake birth certificate and she lures him into purchasing it. At this point, it's the year 2003 and he's 71 years old. He was sentenced to 25 years to life, died in prison in 2008. When they inform Cary Steiner about his brother's kidnapper's death, he responds, "Why would I care? I haven't thought about him in years." A couple years later, Timothy White, the boy that Steven saved, would die of a pulmonary embolism in 2010. Apparently, not only did envy play a role in his brother becoming this insane serial killer, but he admitted to having sick and twisted fantasies all of his life, even when he was a kid. He said he would fantasize about tying women up and torturing them. This psychopath is still on death row as of 2022. And that ends the tragic story surrounding Steven Steiner.
This guy ruined 7 lives for clouts. This guy's name is Noah Gal. This guy was a popular TikToker and Instagrammer, and the videos he would make is he would get in his BMW and then film himself driving at really high speeds. And then he would ask his audience to guess how fast he was going in the comments. And a few months ago, when Noah was 17, he was driving as fast as 182 miles per hour. And all of a sudden, he hit a Nissan Rogue that was parked in front of him from behind. The impact from Noah's BMW was so strong that the back of the Nissan essentially got crushed into the front. And these are 2 of the victims. A total of 6 people were in that Nissan Rogue, and they all lost their lives. And Noah got arrested, of course, and he's looking at 6 counts of vehicular homicide, which could very well add up to be a life sentence.
And this is why you can't trust everyone's cooking. This is the case of Joe Metheny, the serial killer who made his victims into hamburgers and sold them. On December 19th, 1996, Joe Metheny was charged with the murders of 3 women in 3 separate incidents. He then confessed to killing a male victim as well. In time, Metheny would claim that he killed at least 10 people, as well as to confessing to even more nauseating crimes. Warning, this is an extreme case, so if you have a weak stomach, please scroll away now. Joe Metheny confessed to eating and grinding up his victims' body parts, which he would then mix with pork and beef, and he would sell them to his customers at his roadside barbecue stand. Joe said he would lure prostitutes to his trailer near the food stand. He would then kill them, dismember them, partially eat them prior to preparing the remains. Like for part 2. While on trial, Metheny said, I cut the meat up and put some in Tupperware bowls. Then I would put it into the freezer. I had real roast beef and pork sandwiches. They were really good. The human body taste was very similar to pork, so if I mixed it together, no one could tell the difference. Joe's sickening run came to an end in 1996 after he kidnapped Rita Kemper, another prostitute. She survived a severe beating from him in his trailer and managed to escape, whereupon she then notified the police. At his sentencing, he requested to be put to death and then said, the words "I'm sorry" will never come out, for they would be a lie. I am more than willing to give up my life for what I have done, to have God judge me and send me to hell for eternity. Lastly, he said he killed because he enjoyed it. Joe ended up receiving the death penalty, but the sentence was changed to life in prison. But on August 8th, 2017, at the age of 62, Joe was found dead in his prison cell.
Today in True Crime News, a pet duck helped solve a 2-year-old missing persons case. No, I'm not kidding. At all. So around 2 years ago, Nellie Sullivan, who was in her 90s, was reported missing in western North Carolina. Right off the bat, though, officers knew that something was pretty suspicious. Immediately, investigators looked at her granddaughter, who is 46-year-old Angela Wamsley, and her husband, 50-year-old Mark Barnes. These 2 have been in and out of trouble with the law for a lot of weird things. Unfortunately, most of them being animal neglect or animal cruelty. Detectives are trying to figure out anything. They had warrants, they've looked for her. Angela and Mark actually at one point told investigators where she might be, but just kind of led them on some wild goose chase. Insert some joke about this actually being a wild duck chase. It was April 14th of this year when this pet duck ran away from its home and then scurried under a trailer. And when its humans were trying to get him, they found a container containing Nellie Sullivan's body. Investigators are trying to determine right now how she died, how long she's been under there. And during their investigation, authorities were actually able to determine that while she has been missing, these 2 were collecting her benefit checks and filling her prescriptions. These 2 are being held without bond on first-degree murder charges. And Sergeant Mark Walker with Buncombe County Sheriff Department said if he could give this duck a medal, he would. We would too, Walker. We would too.